Good afternoon. Welcome. This is a roundtable in the Enable speaker series, AI in Action, so called. This particular session is on enhancing customer experience. I'm your host today. My name is Paul Pangaro. I'm professor of practice in the Human Computer Interaction Institute, which is part of the School of Computer Science here at CMU. The School of Computer Science, along with CMU's Tepper School of Business, have created Enable, which is a recent initiative. For those of you who are new, just very briefly, we're a retail and services collaborative. And our mission is to create more humane, efficient, and positive retail and service experiences. So we focus on advances in interaction design, service design, organizational design that are all required to adopt new technology. And we combine these areas of design and technology into a single initiative. There's much more on our site. Please go there, have a look, get in touch if there are specific areas of interest to you. And that site label is cmu.edu/enable, E-N-A-I-B-L-E. Few logistics. Brief introduction to today and the panelists, and we'll have a 30 to 40 minute panel discussion followed by Q&A. So the event is on the record and is being recorded. And if you want to pose a question, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A icon. Please post your question there and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So let me offer a chance for each of our panelists to introduce themselves one by one, and then I'll give another quick sense of where we're going with all of this and then open it up to the panel. So Chris Stevens, could you start, please?
Sure. Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. Happy to be a part of the community. Actually proud to have Zendesk as a sponsor of the Enable program. I'm very proud to participate in that way. My name is Chris Stevens. I'm a vice president at Zendesk, and my responsibilities are the data and analytics practice across the company. So that includes delivering on data platforms and engineering, BI, analytics, data science, AI when we get there, for the business of Zendesk, and the strategy around how we think about data and analytics and how that might benefit our end customers who are using our platform.
Great, thanks very much. Jimmy?
Thanks, Paul. My name is Jimmy Drake. I am the VP of e-commerce at Purple Innovations. And my role there is essentially accountable for the D2C business, and that it spans a number of organizations, including digital product management, user experience, customer insights, our site merchandising organization, and our customer contact organization, which includes sales and service. And outside of just having P&L accountabilities, our responsibility is to ensure that we are crafting our brand and product and service narrative in a way that is relevant to our customers and helps them ultimately find the right product that's going to ultimately meet their needs and generate the outcomes that they had hoped. So we spent a lot of time researching and understanding our customers, their motivations, behaviors, and habits, so that we can create digital and even some physical experiences that's going to connect them with those outcomes.
Wonderful, thank you. And my colleague, Raelyn, here in the HCII, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure, Paul, thank you. I'm Raelyn Murarka, and I'm currently assistant teaching professor at the Human Computer Interaction Institute here at CMU. I teach both bachelor and master students in user-centered research and evaluation and digital service innovation. Before joining CMU about 3 years ago, I led client experience strategy initiatives at BNY Mellon. And prior to that, the voice of the customer program and UX research work at American Eagle Outfitters.
Fantastic, great. Thanks all for being here, and thanks especially to Zendesk for being a sponsor of Enable and also for our event today. Thanks so much, Chris, appreciate it. So here we are, enhancing customer experience, also known as CX, specifically in relation to AI, machine learning, and all the great new technology that's coming along. So clearly, I don't think this is contentious, customer experience strategies rely on the use of sophisticated AI and machine learning, which can be complex and sophisticated data models, including digital twins, which is a particular interest of mine. And all of this will change how retailers present and sell and deliver goods and services. So the competitive pressures, I assume, are there on all of the industries that we know in retail and service. One question I'd like to put out there, it's not necessarily to be answered immediately, but will AI become table stakes for customer experience and for designing for customer experience? So that's, in a sense, one overarching question. As everyone knows from the write-up, we want to talk about benefits and limitations of using AI models to drive decision-making by consumers, but also presumably by businesses as well. In the subtitle of our roundtable today is this hype versus reality thing. There's an enormous amount of hype about AI. It's really quite a deluge. What about that? How can we separate that out in the course of the time we have today? And very importantly, what can retailers and service businesses do today? So in this context, we've got data science in general, which of course is the backbone of AI and machine learning. Even customer experience itself is a source of hype, knowing the customers, right? This is a kind of, we're on steroids in regard to all of these things. But enough of a introduction, really. I'd like to go around one by one and have you each, where do you orient around these things? What's your sort of top line about these broad issues? And then we'll go deeper and deeper as we go along. We haven't decided on an order. Shall we stick with the one we started with? Maybe Chris, you can go first.
Sure. So I guess in no particular order to some of the points you're making, Paul, I certainly think there's a lot of hype in the AI space. What actually occurred to me as you were talking is, as I look at our panel, Raelyn is certainly an expert in CX user design, and not that Jimmy is not, but you sort of wound up, maybe on purpose, this is why you're at Carnegie Mellon, Paul, but Raelyn could certainly represent thought leadership in the CX user design space. Jimmy's trying to run a business based on the combination of that and my expertise, which is data science and analytics. So it actually makes for a really interesting panel, I think. But so I don't know if, as you were talking, surprisingly, the most important thing for me is the CX piece. I think AI, I'm not saying it's hype, but I drive a Tesla. There's a lot of AI helping me get around in my car all the time. So it's very real every time I get in my car. But should every retailer around the world enact their AI strategy tomorrow? Probably not. It depends on where they are in their own maturity, right? But every retailer around the world had better have a really great CX strategy. So if you think about the hype in those two domains, obviously AI is real for sure, but I think there's a little bit of hype in how important it is that everybody go running to the AI machine and start pulling out innovation. But if you don't have the CX piece right, you can only optimize, cost reduce, and so on your business to some extent, right? You can only get so far. You can't grow based on that. And all you're doing is racing to the bottom if you're not looking at the customer. What do we do this for? We sell jeans. We all have this American Eagle Outfitters background. We sell jeans for customers. Zendesk makes software for customers. Jimmy and at the folks at Purple, they make bedding and home solutions for customers, right? And if you lose that sight, I think you lose it altogether.
So starting with customer experience is clearly more important than starting with the AI.
100%.
I get that. That's great.
100%. If you were going to hire one of the three of us, I would probably hire Raelyn first. Get your customer right. After that, you can get a data analytics person to figure out the math behind it, but get your customer right first.
Fantastic. Great. Jimmy?
Yeah, if I might add on to that, I mean, I totally agree. It's funny, Chris said that the first thing I try to do is hire Raelyn here whenever I start. And he's right. Like there's, you got to have a purpose, right? Like I think probably all of us know, and most people on the call listening in know that you can't just throw technology at a business for technology's sake. You have to understand what matters most to your customers and your business and find the marriage between those two, and then leverage a tool, which is the way I look at AI, It's a tool that can help us. It can help us get closer to our customers and solve their problems, meet their outcomes, generate the things that they are emotionally trying to create based on the product or service that you're selling. I think that's the key with AI. And the question of hype versus reality, I can tell you that where I sit, I get emails every day from different solutions on how they're going to leverage AI to help me run the business better. I got one this morning that was like something I never heard of, which was, we'll optimize all your buttons and colors on the website in real time for you daily. And it's going to, and it's going to generate X. And like, that's just one example of probably what most people get on this call and like what I get daily. So there is a lot of noise, I would say, out there, and a lot of pull to use certain tactics. But the reality is, if that tactic that they're offering doesn't ladder up to a broader customer experience strategy or a customer need or business outcome that you're trying to generate, it's kind of useless, right? So I think that's kind of where I think Chris was going. And one of the things that we've been focused on, and I've worked with Chris and Raelyn in the past, and it's really about understanding the moments of truth. So the moments that matter most to your customers and drive in the moment conversion, and more importantly, lead to long-term brand and product loyalty. If you can understand that, if you can understand why humans are acquiring your product or service and what's motivating them to do that, and then through the usage cycle, what are the things that keep them coming back and rehiring that product or service, and creates the emotional outcome that they want, and you can generate AI tactics that help you get closer to those customers, that's where the value is. It's not about just saying, well, let's try to, create a bunch of different versions and test that to see what works well. It's really about understanding what is important to your customers. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that that we learned in some of my past life and research that was around a customer need was, there were within the context of apparel shopping, they're looking for certain attributes out of a product that are going to be important to them, such as having a versatile outfit or a versatile look, right? And if you have that, if you understand that thread of something that's important to your customers, then how do you attack it? How do you solve that? And one way to do that is leaning into data and analytics and using lookalikes or digital twins, and using those tools to help present relevant content to your customers, because in retail, discovery matters. It's a big deal. It's just old school retail merchandising 101. And if you can lean into those kind of problems with this technology, it gets you to that place much quicker. It gets you to the right discovery moments much faster with your customers in that context.
Great. Raelyn, give us your reflections, please.
I don't know. They kind of stole what was sort of my stake in the ground, which is get to know the customer first.
Okay.
I think as I hear this, I think part of the challenges that companies have is they think that AI can automate and solve all of the issues that they have with the data, and it can't. You need to be able to synthesize the data and understand what's there, and then be able to act upon it. And a lot of these companies, the software organizations and the engineering teams just have the capacity or the ability to act upon it. So the leveraging, understanding what data matters most, what you specifically will be able to focus on and then act upon, I think is most important. And that goes back to the customer. Are you listening to the customer first? Like in the example Jimmy provided, you can create a solution that can create personalization. But if you didn't listen to what the customer needed first, and you just started with what data do we have and how can we create personalization or create algorithms and push that to the customer, you're going to fail, because you still have this sort of outward facing model instead of looking at the customer, listening to them. And I think what's important that we do a lot and teach a lot at Carnegie Mellon is working with the customers to co-create value, listening to them. So instead of jumping on board and using AI to create a whole bunch of personalization algorithms, first use it to understand the customers, to talk to your customers, and then also pair that with qualitative data to get to know your customers really well. Work with them, even in participatory design modes, to first determine what they want, which is what I think Jimmy did in that example, and then create models that can then automate it and assist with the technology.
Yeah, I think that the theme that you hear I think you're hearing from all of us is, and I think this is the angle that most of us take it, even though we have a super quantitative data bend, we take a qualitative approach to start. And Raelyn said it right, talking to your customers, right? Like immersing yourselves in their lives to understand the things that they care about, the challenges that they experience with your product or service, or the problems that it might solve. That's the right place to start, because there's this natural tendency to like try to figure out how to use big data and how to apply these AI techniques. But the reality is, at the end of the day, what you're trying to solve is an individual human's problem or meet their need. And if you start with that sort of like grassroots foundational effort of just knowing your customers and learning about them on a emotional and individual level, it's a great place to build that foundation for the strategy into the future.
And then totally agree. What I was going to say then, Paul, kind of bringing it back to no AI is not actually just hype. If you take the foundation that Jimmy and Raelyn just sort of illustrated, which is really get to know your customer, both quantitatively and qualitatively, the challenge for most retailers is then now I need to go deliver that at scale. I can't possibly know, a typical retailer has hundreds of thousands, millions of customers. I can't possibly know them all. I can't possibly interact with them all, right? So I need to understand all of their needs every time, all the time, when they're interacting with us, for all of them at the same time. And so then all that brings it back to, where does advanced technology like AI fit into the equation? Once you have that foundational understanding of your customer, we all started with know the customer first. Now you got to go do that all the time, every time, consistently. And that's where, if you sort of abstract AI back to, it's automated prescriptive decisions at scale, then applying what you learn, as we were just talking about from core CX principles, in an automated fashion at scale, now you're back to, I need a machine that will allow me to do that, right? And that comes back to then how AI fits into the equation.
Beautiful. Thanks for bringing it back, because I think that's the essence of where we want to go now. When I look at the attendees and I think about where they are coming from, I don't think there's any contention about the primacy of the customer and knowing the customer. I love the fact that you're emphasizing both qualitative and quantitative. I think that's great, because otherwise the technology with its quantitative emphasis takes over, which we don't want. But now let's go here. Let's go exactly here. Recommendations, personalization. What are the general words around how to speak to the individual? And then how does AI specifically come in? Recommendation engines, 1990s, Amazon, maybe that was the beginning. That's old stuff. That was AI. It may or may not have been ML at the time, machine learning. But now everything is a particular way of doing the technology. What do each of you think about how to go from customer yes, personalization, individualization yes, what's the next step? In particular for companies that maybe don't already have become entrenched in all of this, haven't implemented anything. But again, my question is, does AI become table stakes? I'm going to come back to that as a kind of theme, because competitively, how do they keep up?
I suppose it becomes table stakes in the sense that at some point in our lifetimes, running your business with a computer was a competitive advantage in a big way, right? And one of us is bound to have an Apple Watch, right? Now just having a computer on your wrist is no big deal, right? So yes, certainly being able to make automated prescriptive decisions at massive scale, if you think of that as AI, is going to have to be table stakes. And then in terms of, you were talking about recommendations and that kind of stuff, this is where the CX angle comes back into it, which is, you want to make sure that the AI you're enabling, or the recommenders that you're building, or however you're implementing that, has the customer need in mind. I love how Jimmy articulated, and I've heard him say it many times, what's the problem you're solving for the customer, but not what's the problem I'm solving for me as the business? What's the problem I'm solving for the customer? And given that and what I know that's likely to work for them, then how do I make that available to them in an automated fashion? It doesn't just have to be a product recommendation. It could be a service design that I'm putting in front of them. It could be an interaction, a whole different experience that I've made available to them as a customer, based on what I understand about their need at the time. So, I think you're right. It's moving beyond just basic product recommendations, but focusing on, like Jimmy said, across that customer journey, what are the key moments and how do I make that easier for my customer, not necessarily easier for me?
Yeah, I agree with Chris all points. I think the interesting thing about what he said previously was scale, right? Like that's where I think there's a it's going to be hard to argue AI doesn't become table stakes on some level within certain aspects of a business just because of the scale problem. Like having a merchandising team try to merchandise a category page of products for millions of customers that come to that and making it relevant for each one of them is impossible, right? There's just unless you want to be upside down.
With tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of SKUs, right?
Right, exactly. So
right.
So fundamentally, like there's just no question, and I think that there's a lot of this already happening, right, in the space, and there's a lot of this sort of already becoming table stakes. I think some of the areas where I think there's still a lot more opportunity for businesses to take control of this and leverage it is in other aspects of their organization. So, for example, in contact centers and how we are showing up with relevant solutions to problems that customers have proactively and contextually. So I think there's some areas where there's been a lot, Amazon or late 1990s starting it, and there's been a lot of sort of maturity over the years and recommenders and personalization and that kind of stuff. But moving beyond that, just product recommenders and discovery, I think that's where there's still some ceiling for it to become more table stakes, even in just content and messaging in general from a brand and product positioning standpoint, and how we support needs as customers come to us, not necessarily for products, but for services after the sale. So I think there's still a lot more opportunity for that. And I do think it's going to become more prevalent, more table stakes for certain businesses that have those needs, for sure.
Raelyn, thoughts?
It's interesting to hear this as this personalization, delivering customized experiences. The other thing you have to be careful with and balance, though, and I'm not sure this is going to be easy. I can see, people coming out with just plug and play things, plug in this algorithm and it's going to do these things for you. Customers, increasingly younger generations, they want transparency, they want authenticity. And any work that I do here at CMU around AI is customers want the ability to know what's happening and be in control of what's happening. If they find that you're just shoving an algorithm or an experience down their throat, you can lose them in that. So there's a delicate balance, and I think we're kind of all working on what that answer is, but being very kind of careful and cognizant of just avoiding sort of plug in, play in solutions that might not be right. And it goes back to our original point, for your customer or for your customer's needs.
There seems to be a lot of consensus here. That's fine. It's not as much fun as a disagreement, but I think we're still talking strategy, right? We're still, yeah, I got to do it. Yeah, that's blah, 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 blah. Tactically, how does a company get into this tactically?
I'd say pragmatically, Paul.
Pragmatically, please.
Yeah, that's the way that I would frame it up. I think that there's a getting into leveraging this tool AI in the context of personalization is a pragmatic approach, and it requires it because there's a very easy way for individuals and organizations to try to boil the ocean with a tool like this. So some of the things that I've done in my past, and I'm actually working with Chris and Raelyn, is crawl, walk, run. So just stepping into it, learning, looking at some of those moments that matter, and then building simple tests and simple validation tactics in easy to reach channels or touch points or moments, just to understand what's the response from customers. Is this working? Is this resonating? Is this something that we want to continue to invest in? Because it is a significant investment. There's a lot of dollars that you need to put in this from a business perspective. And depending on what you're selling and who you're selling it to, it might not be as big of an impact as you had hoped in certain contexts or certain uses. So you have to be pragmatic in your approach and look at certain easily attainable use cases that you can quickly get data on and understand the value of the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. And pragmatically speaking, imagine that you've identified a handful of these moments that warrant maybe some AI, some recommended experiences or whatever you might be recommending for your customer. But some of those are naturally going to be difficult to sort of digitize or deliver in a digital way. And so while maybe that, this is a sort of typical sort of consulting grid approach to what's feasible and what's doable and that kind of stuff, where's the value coming from? You definitely have to pick a place to start that is doable in the short term, because you also have internal constituents, whether your executive team, your board, whoever that might be, that are also reading all the same hype and have some probably outsized expectation that they're hoping the outcomes will look like. Kind of to Jimmy's point, let's level set on what's really possible. But you're going to need to start on something that you can deliver on in a reasonable period of time. Otherwise, you'll be out doing some experimentation forever and never deliver anything tangible, even if you didn't tackle the hardest problem, right? In retail, the hardest problem is, how does the customer feel when they're wearing your clothes, right? That's going to be hard to capture digitally, right? So that's why so many people are focused on things like product recommendations. But start there and start to prove the value, and then you'll get more investment, you get more buy-in, you'll start to demonstrate that this is something that's doable, and then it just can sort of grow from there.
So I'm hearing incremental, small scale, pragmatic, tractable, not boiling the ocean.
Yeah, and actually another comment Jimmy made about customer experience, and I guess it would be remiss on my part, being that I work at Zendesk, is, don't forget, to Jimmy's point, to try to understand your whole customer end to end. If you're in retail, sure, you interact with them in stores, you probably interact with them online, you send them emails and ads all the time and whatever, but think about that contact center, think about the channels you're interacting with them through, whether it be messaging and other things. And that's something that we're thinking a lot about at Zendesk, is how do I make that end-to-end experience easy for our customers, say like Jimmy at Purple? How do we make it easy for them to interact with their customers, right? So then they can get that full view of their customer interaction.
Yeah, and I think any retailer, Paul, recognizes that, really brand product loyalty is won and lost after the sale, right? That's really where it happens. And I think that's why Zendesk is a great tool and partner, and helps you, can help you solve those problems and those challenges, because that is the reality, and we recognize that, especially at Purple. We sell a durable good, thousands of dollars, so there's high expectations for how that product's going to perform and support the outcomes that our customers hired it for to begin with. So being able to solve their problems or the challenges they have post-purchase extremely efficiently and quickly and to their expectations is critically important for our business.
Great. Raelyn, what are your thoughts on this?
I think I had two thoughts, but I think to where Jimmy was last, as we had this conversation, a lot of it has been about using AI on the front end to deliver experiences. But a lot of the work that I've done in the past with the Voice of the Customer program was looking at natural language processing, and hopefully as they can get better with AI models, ways to actually listen to the data and listen to the customers. There's so much data generated by customer service interactions, by feedback mechanisms on websites, through emails that are sent into websites, that is really ignored. And there's a lot of information about your customer in there that if you're not able to analyze it and synthesize it, that you could really overlook some really important things. So that's a different way that you can use AI instead of delivering the experiences. And just to go back just a little bit in terms of like, how do you take steps and implement things? I want to say is before you even start to build the first thing, one of my favorite things to do, it's so easy to do with AI, is build out prototypes in a Wizard of Oz format where you pretend to be the algorithm. So before you start to build anything, right, you test it in a way physically to make sure that it is the right solution, the right need. So that's even before you decide this is going to be a software project that we're going to tackle on our technology roadmap. Make sure that's part of your testing and iteration process.
This relates to a question we have, which we might bring in now, and then we'll transition more and more to Q&A from the audience. Ian Duncan Stalker asks, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, is along the lines of not only at the face-to-face with the customer in the moment now, but his question comes from implementing an AI, and he refers, by the way, to good old-fashioned AI, not just machine learning and neural nets, that observes and learns from sales associates and extracts from those interactions things that could become ways of personalizing for customers. So I think that's another example of not AI at the interface with the user, but rather as a learning mechanism. Any thoughts on that? Are there other ways of extracting knowledge about the customer relationship, maintaining the loyalty of the customer based on the quality of interactions, and learning about better quality interactions from human to human, which then can become?
For sure. There actually are a lot of pretty good solutions that some organizations are starting to think about in that space. I guess I won't name any of them, but to look at, what does a good agent look like? What does a positive interaction look like? Not because it produced a non-churn event or produced an expansion event or whatever. Yeah, those are positive outcomes for our business. But what does that look like in modeling that? So then that can serve proactive recommendations to other agents about how they might interact with a given customer in a particular moment. So there are some solutions like that in the market. Some of them are probably pretty early, but some of them look pretty good actually. And then it actually connects a little bit to something that Raelyn was just saying about, there's all this interesting information, incredibly rich information that your customers are sharing with you when they talk to you, whether they're actually talking to you or they're interacting on social media, through your service and call center desk, through email and everything else. Really digging in there to understand that, I think is definitely a big opportunity.
Yeah, and that, just to echo that, I think it's a great point in thinking about how you leverage this tool of AI and some of the work that the three of us have done in the past within the context of voice of the customer. And it's interesting, right? It's funny, it takes us right back to where we started, which is getting a better sense of what matters most to your customers. And that's what really it can do. It can help you understand when you think about, I always think about sort of retail as three layers, brand, product, and service, and how well those things are resonating for your customers. And what you're trying to do really is figure out of those sort of different areas of your business, what are the drivers of satisfaction? And then beneath that, what are the sub-drivers of that part of that business's satisfaction? So within the service layer, what are the drivers of satisfaction for service? And it can be really hard to tease that out when you have, to Raelyn's point, all this data coming in from social, from emails, from all the chats that you're getting on the website, or the calls even that you're getting in the contact center. So how do you sort of use this tool to help tease out through structured and unstructured data, what is the driver of a satisfaction for a part of the business that could then use that data to change your strategy or to focus on things that really mattered to the customer at that point in their journey. So there's a really interesting sort of flip side to how you can use this as a tool to generate a deeper connection with your customers.
Great. So pursuing this idea that it's important to move into this world, what do you think CX is going to look like in about 3 to 5 years? How will it be different than today? And how will technology, and specifically AI, make it different?
I mean, I think
better start
okay,
with
Chris.
Raelyn on that one.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you want to start?
I was going to pass the buck to Raelyn.
I'm going to pass the buck to me. I, what will it look like in 5 years? That is so hard to say, but this pandemic, the cultural issues of the past year,
Mhm.
it's changing customer expectations. And I think customer experience itself is going to have to keep up with that. Like, number one, like during the pandemic, some companies had to make changes so quickly that they were able to kind of innovate and deliver some alternative products or new products and services that is setting expectations to deliver even faster. So, we're talking about listening to your customer, doing studies, doing research. I could see in 5 years where there has to be mechanisms where you hear something, you can validate that it's something important to a lot of your customers. You might have to design something, test something, innovate on it, and launch it in 3 months, right? That would have been unheard of when I was working in e-commerce, even 3 months, right? That's probably what's going to happen in 5 years, because customer expectations, they're just getting more and more impatient. They want the next thing. I think the other thing of it I'll throw out there are just, and I mentioned it before, but sort of we are becoming much more cognizant of cultural issues and sensitivity. And that is going to have to play out in our solutions. And I don't know if AI can do that. Back to the question from the panelists, can you have an AI learn about a salesperson and then be that salesperson? We're not going to be there in 5 years. AI is not going to be able to do that. It's not going to replace human judgment, particularly as we have learned, human judgment has not been real great in the past. So we're still going to be, can AI make the humans who interact with our customers more efficient so that they are able to focus on things that are more important and less on things related to productivity, taking notes, looking up orders. So I think it's twofold: expectations and cultural things.
Any other takers?
I mean, Raelyn nailed it. Like, I think it's two things to me. Is efficiency is we're going to see there's going to be an explosion there, and we're just going to get a lot faster to market with solving some of these problems, because necessity is going to demand it, because customer experience expectations are going to continue to get raised day in and day out. So I think that's where we're going to see it. And I think, Paul, to the question about AI becoming table stakes, I do think it's going to become, over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, more table stakes in other parts of your business outside of more foundational product recommenders and that type of stuff that you typically see now with most retailers.
Right.
Yeah, and kind of tying back to even the first things that we were saying, though, what does CX look like in 5 years, in my personal opinion? I mean, I don't know what the practice of CX looks like. I'm not a practitioner, but I am a C, and I'm someone who tries to deliver CX for lots of brands. I think that while all these things are true about technology and expectations and the speed of innovation and everything else, I think the people part, like, I'm sort of a humanist. So I actually think that the brands that are winning in 5 years aren't going to be the ones that got a little faster and more efficient and got to operate the way that Amazon does, right? Because you can't lose sight of the fact that Amazon's CX is so good that in one click, I can buy just about anything in the world. Yes, it's efficient. Yes, their network is whatever, and there's lots of downsides too. But the point is, don't lose sight of the fact that their CX is so great. I can think of something and I own it in 5 minutes. And it's at my house the next day. That's CX. That's amazing, right? But trying to just do that isn't what's going to make you win. I think going back to, like, there's humans on the other end of this conversation that you'll stand out, not by having an A- CX digital experience with AI behind it, but having like an A+ understanding of the people that you're interacting with. So I think it'll actually become more important than it is now. I know it's hype-ish, like we said at the beginning, but I think it's real, because we're still all humans. And by the way, being locked up for 1.5 years away from each other underscores the value of being around each other and interacting with each other, not just interacting with machines.
Beautiful. I love that return earlier. The customer is the most important. That's where you start. The human is the customer, and that's at the top of importance, and so on. That's a wonderful return to that. Let me open it up for questions. If folks in the audience have questions, please put it in the Q&A chat box. We can go a little further and await more questions coming in. Again, I'm always the pragmatist and interested in how to help our audience think tactically. Where would you put resources?
I'd put them behind the employee myself. I think, and it goes back to this human touch. I know there was a big move to digital, buying a lot of things digital because of the pandemic, but people are going to want to get back out. I don't think that's going to dramatically change the fact that people are still going to want to have human to human retail experiences. It'll look very different. A store may look incredibly different, but there are going to be people there. Customer service may look different, but there are going to be people answering the phone. Using AI to assist them, to enable them to do their job better, I think you should focus there and less on trying to automate things that you can't automate. Humans and human interactivity. That'd be too hard.
Yeah, she nailed it. I mean, I think, retail works for a reason, right? Like there's a reason why humans go out and go to malls, and part of it's social, part of it is to help them find the product or service that they specifically need. And the same within the context of digital. And while stores sort of evaporated for a certain period of time for us over the course of the past year because of the pandemic, that doesn't mean that need still doesn't exist, right? You just have to find a different way to serve it. And in some categories, high human touch is really critical, especially when you're buying something that's really expensive, and having a human sort of be able to connect with you and help you understand how that product service is going to meet your needs. But being able to do it with the right terminology, the right language, the right information to provide it for them in an efficient manner, I think is really where Raelyn was going. That's where AI can really help out. It's empowering humans with the right content or context to help sell or help the customer on the other end.
And that segues a little bit into this other question about, employee experience and sort of back office, and what does that mean there? And my thoughts are that the same basic principles apply. I personally believe that the reason your culture is so important in your workplace is because it comes out in your products or services, whether you mean it to or not. If you make mattresses and home products like Jimmy and Purple do, somehow your culture shows up there. And I don't just mean in the salesperson you deal with, it just somehow it's there, right? And so I think if you make for an easy employee experience, understanding the same principles that you would apply to CX to your employees. So you're understanding your employees' needs, what are their moments of truth, how do they create good services and products for your end customers, and you make that easier, that shows up somehow in the products and services that you deliver as a company. So it's not just culture that shows up, but the fact that it's easy to be there. We have employee experience in mind when we design our processes inside of Zendesk, for example. That shows up as how you show up as a company. And I think that matters. It ends up being this thread in your ultimate customer experience.
So again, I love this emphasis on the customer, the human, the employee as the human, and the human experience. But what about scale? We spoke a few minutes ago about the power of AI is scale. And doesn't that mean machine to human rather than human to human? And how do we reconcile this?
Yeah, I think again, it does because of the scale piece for sure. And I think some of it shows up in the good old fashioned AI in the sense that I want to inform people using AI on how to operate better, act differently, provide a service in a different way and whatever. And sometimes I need to just propagate a decision 10 million times in the next 5 minutes. Right?
Yeah.
I can't possibly do that without scaling technology.
It depends on application, Paul, in my opinion. What the purpose, what the use is, what the problem you're trying to solve is. For merchandising and things like that, there's certainly a scale piece, and it's large. It's a large scale piece, right? But when you look at customer service with a high touch sort of experience, there's going to be scale there where you're going to have when you have let's say AI powered employee tools that can help get to the root of the customer's problem or the issue they have and help you solve it quickly. You're going to be more efficient with your, not to get too technical, but your average call times. So it's gonna create efficiency there, but it's also going to empower them to become more just better at what they do with their customers. So you're not going to want to take that scale to the point where you don't have humans anymore, right? You're still going to want them. So there's a limiter there, but it's going to allow you to be more efficient.
So I have a question about that. Is that really true? Do we not want business that comes only from human to machine interactions? Is that, I'm twisting your words a little bit.
I think there's some. I think Jimmy started out by saying it does depend, but I think it does depend. It does. And I think there is some. Right. You know, if you're in a commoditized space and I'm just trying to find the cheapest product that's easiest for me to get, I don't really need a person in the middle of it. Someone had asked a question in the chat about luxury goods, and Jimmy alluded to that. There's always a piece of that like, I'm not buying a $25,000 watch probably ever, but if I were going to, I'm not buying it from a machine or a website without touching it, feeling it, having a person talk to me about the value. What does this mean, right? So I think there's a space for it for sure.
And look, Paul, maybe in 10, 15 years or beyond, like it gets to that point where AI is that much humanistic and it feels like you're really talking to a human. But in my business now, where we're at, we know that there's a lot of value just by having a true human touch and a conversation that builds that connection. And that's the point, is like and in that context, right, AI can help that agent be more relevant and be more contextual with some type of data that's powering the conversation, that it's sort of influencing how they speak and what they serve as relevant information to that customer. But I think totally detaching the two and relying solely on AI at this point probably isn't going to get it. I
think we're in agreement. Raelyn, I'd love to ask you in a second if you have ideas here, but just to cheat a little bit, so much of the interaction, so an airline, for example, there's a lot of interaction now through chat and maybe chat bots and maybe bots that pretend to be humans but are really not. And scale, again, I'm back on this. I think of myself as a humanist, but I'm back on this idea that there's tremendous advantage in being able to scale certain kinds of interactions through personalization that comes from computation and AI, whatever you want to call it. So I don't want to leave our audience with the idea that the human touch is forever here and it's critical.
No, I don't need a person to tell me where my package is. I could call, chat, text, whatever you do to get a hold of UPS to figure out where my package is, or Purple.
Yeah, but
I don't need a person to tell me that. So yeah.
Right, but there's a continuum between that and do I want this $25,000 watch? And isn't AI going to come more and more toward what we now think of as only human to human? Raelyn, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's how you use it and how you present it. As the AI becomes more capable, I don't know if we need to make it more human though. I know that I think people will reasonably interact with AIs knowing they're AIs. And that's what we see in the research. It goes back to what I said about transparency and choice. I need to get some questions answered and okay, maybe I'm buying a $10,000 watch. I might go so far in my journey using a chatbot, but I need to know it's a chatbot. Yes. Right? Like I need to know that what I'm interacting with, don't have it try to pretend that it's a human. I need to know that I can get to the human when the time comes. So, as a consumer myself, and what I see when we do some of these studies, that's what people want. I'll go use the technology. I'll use the chatbots. I'll look things up myself until I get to a point where I can't. And then it switches over to the transaction. And I think that line will get closer and closer till it's almost maybe there and you're using very few humans at that point in time.
Right. So let's zoom out a little bit in the remaining time. And again, I invite some questions to come in. We have one more that we'll talk about in a minute, and then we'll close up. I think we're on the right path, if you will, or about the right domain. I think we're covering this range of ideas in terms of range of scale, range of human touch, depth of technology, all with the consumer in mind and so on. Here's a question that I think I'll synopsize as, because of the technology that is leading us into this world of AI, do we need a new model of what customer experience is?
That's a Raelyn question for sure.
I guess so. I'm not sure what that means. A new model of what customers.
So I can go a little deeper. So
Yeah, that's what I'm looking.
there are appropriate frameworks now, again, from the question. The three T's: task, treatment, and tangibles of service encounters. Does this change when there's a mechanization, that's my paraphrase, involved, when there's an AI involved? Do we think of it the same way? This questioner mentions Kano. Delighters become expectations and performance attributes. This is this realm of existing ways of thinking about it at a layer down, I think, from where we were before in terms of loyalty and that kind of thing.
So measurement models. Yeah, I mean, and there was also, the Net Promoter Score, which became very hot for a while and is not anymore. My opinion on these things is that you need to understand your business and how you're going to measure your business. There are some models out there that you can use to do that, and some of them are very effective, or they're a starting point for you. But there will always be new ones. Things will always change and evolve. So the definitive answer is yes, because we'll need to evolve how we think about it, much like how we have evolved how we thought about it. Like NPS was very hot for a minute, and now it's not. So, and now we're looking at other models. So 5 years from now, yes, I'm not sure we can predict what they will be, because things will change significantly by then.
I actually interpreted your question differently, Paul. And I'm not a CX person, so I can't spot off all the CX models that exist out there. But I actually, not that it's not going to evolve, but 1,000 years from now, assuming there's still people inhabiting Earth or Mars, the basic needs and problems that people have are going to be basically the same. And so how you solve those is, sure, it can be enabled by technology that we can't even conceive of right now. But I think there's some continuity to the human part of it. That is, like, Jimmy keeps coming back to, like, I hired my mattress to do a job for me, right? I have this need, and I don't just mean sleeping comfortably is a need, but I have this need. It's a human thing. And so how you think about addressing that may evolve. And definitely the technology we use to solve it will certainly evolve. But I don't think that the model that you use to understand the person's need and problem in the moment, that probably goes backwards 100,000 years, and it's roughly the same.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm a big believer in sort of, there's a really great book out there. It's called The Best Interface is No Interface. And the premise is that it's about outcomes, right? Like, humans have a problem that they're trying to get solved. And if they could solve it like this immediately, they would. When they're trying to interact with a product, they're trying to understand if the service is going to meet their needs. They want it. There's an end that they're trying to get to. And what we're trying to do here is figure out, how do we get them to that end as quickly and as efficiently as possible that's going to create the outcome that they wanted. So how, to Chris's point, how we go about solving that is going to continue to evolve and get closer and get better and more tailored. But the fundamental outcomes that humans are trying to achieve probably isn't going to change much. The emotional outcomes.
So these comments are wonderful, and maybe we're coming to a kind of close as a sort of summary or overview of what we think is the most important. Would you like to make some final comments before I bring us to conclusion? Other questions are invited in the Q&A, but we've covered the ones that have come along. Any closing thoughts from perhaps each of you as a kind of overview?
I mean, 5 years from now, you might have to invite an AI to this panel discussion, Paul.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give it a much harder time than I'm giving it.
Very nice.
That'll be interesting.
I would just say, one, thank you guys. This has been super interesting and a fun conversation. I wish we did more of this. The other thing I would say for anybody listening out there, I think the future and the opportunity with AI is exciting and bright and interesting. And I think if you really can generate that clear understanding of what matters most to your customer and your business, and you can, and if there's opportunities to leverage a tool like this to support it, I think it's fun and it's a really interesting thing to do. And there's a lot of benefits to it.
Any other comments?
No, just continued reiteration of put the customer at the center of everything you do.
Great, good.
Yeah, I would reemphasize that. It's interesting. In some recent reading I saw, there was a statistic where the alignment of companies believe that they were doing everything they could to meet their customers' needs versus customers feeling that the company were meeting their needs was completely out of alignment. Because I don't think that they were listening appropriately. So I think and it goes back to, if you're going to do something, listen to your customers, right, and enable your employees. And if you can find ways to do that where AI can assist you to do that better, that's where I think that's where it can come in. I wanted to listen to volumes of data from my employees. The only way that you could do that was natural language processing, because nobody could read all of that information. That's a great use for AI, right? So it kind of goes back to, what do you need to accomplish most? And then, is that a tool you can use?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll just make some quick closing remarks. First of all, thanks to all three of you, Chris, Raelyn, and Jimmy. Thanks especially to Zendesk and Chris for being a sponsor of Enable and supporting this event today. There's more about our mission and our directions. Please get in touch via the website, cmu.edu/enable, E-N-A-I-B-L-E. And there are videos of this event and prior events as well. Also, I want to make a comment about an upcoming event on Tuesday, the 29th of June at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll hear from the program leaders in the Master of Science programs in Business Analytics, Product Management, and the Human-Computer Interaction Institute. Each program will give an introduction about their capstone projects, where companies can sponsor a student team. And you'll learn more about that. There'll be an extensive Q&A, and we'll send you all updates on that if you're on our mailing list. If you're not, write to us at enable@cmu.edu to join us. And also let us know what you're interested in. We view this very much as a community of conversation and a kind of co-evolution. We are CMU with industry contacts, but what does industry need and what can we bring to the industry is an ongoing conversation, of which I think this was a really excellent example. So thanks again to our guests and speakers. Help us grow the community, if you will. Please become a part of our activities. All the best. Thank you very much. That's it for today. Bye-bye.